The history of storing our words stretches back into the dim quiet of ancient times. Long before the first sheets of paper were ever made, people sought gentle ways to keep their stories and records safe. In those early days, when writing was young and precious, the very idea of paper did not yet exist. Instead, our ancestors turned to what they had around them: cool, solid clay from riverbanks, or tall reeds from marshy delta lands. It was a humble beginning, marked by soft clay tablets and fragile scrolls that would crinkle softly when unrolled. Even then, thousands of years ago, a quiet need was felt to preserve words beyond the moment, to tuck them away carefully so they might survive the passing seasons and the turning of years. Before writing, knowledge lived in the minds of elders and in the oral tales shared around flickering fires. That tradition was vibrant but fleeting. It relied entirely on memory and the careful teaching of each generation. With the advent of writing, humanity gained a more lasting vessel for memory. No longer did every story have to be continually retold to survive. It could be inscribed and set aside, to be discovered later by eyes that never met the original storyteller. This shift did not happen all at once or loudly. It crept in as scribes scratched symbols into clay or inked characters onto papyrus, gradually weaving a safety net under our collective memory. From those first attempts, a lineage of storage practices would evolve, each one a modest improvement on the last. Yet through all the changes, the fundamental impulse stayed the same: to take words and ideas that mattered and give them a home outside the fragile human mind, somewhere they could rest and endure. And so, in the cool silence of ancient archives and in the quiet corners of homes, began the long tradition of safeguarding words for the future. In Mesopotamia, a land of early cities and slow rivers, a scribe would scoop up a lump of damp clay and shape it into a small flat tablet. With a simple wooden stylus, he would press gentle wedge-shaped marks into the soft surface, recording inventories of grain, or perhaps a quiet prayer to the gods. When the words were complete, the tablet was left to dry in the warm air, or was baked hard in a kiln, becoming as permanent as fired pottery. These clay tablets became some of the world's first books. Though they were as solid and small as a hand could hold, they carried words through time. Once fully dried, a tablet made a soft clink if tapped against another, a comforting little sound of knowledge safely stored. The clay, once merely mud from the river, had quietly transformed into a lasting record, holding messages that could be read years or even centuries later. Once inscribed and hardened, these tablets needed a resting place. In the cool, dim rooms of ancient temples and palaces, people set aside special niches in the walls to hold them. Little alcoves made of sun-baked brick would cradle stacks of tablets, each one containing a piece of a story or a record of daily life. In some places, wooden shelves lined the walls, supporting tablets that sat in neat rows, like small, silent bricks of knowledge. Over the years, as records accumulated, these shelves grew full, and one can imagine an attendant occasionally dusting them off, the clay surfaces rough but enduring. Perhaps in the late afternoon an archive keeper would stroll through the tablet room with a small broom or cloth, gently sweeping away any sand or dust that had settled. If they noticed a crack beginning to form on a tablet, they might make a note to have it rewritten onto fresh clay soon, so the information would not be lost. Thus, even in those ancient days, there was a quiet practice of maintenance. Year after year, new tablets came in and were placed in order, and older ones were occasionally recopied or repaired. The archive lived and grew like a carefully tended garden of information, each tablet a seed of knowledge planted in its proper bed. Even in private homes, a merchant or a family might keep their own collection of tablets. They stored them in simple wooden boxes or clay jars, carefully labelled with a clay tag to remember what was inside. Opening such a jar or chest would reveal dozens of clay pieces, each with its tiny wedge markings, waiting patiently to share their information whenever needed. It was a quiet sort of library. No pages to turn, just solid tablets to pick up one by one, each heft carrying the weight of recorded memory. One famous example of an ancient archive was the library of King Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, in present-day Iraq, around the 7th century BCE. There, tens of thousands of clay tablets were collected and archived, representing the knowledge and correspondence of the Assyrian Empire. These tablets included everything from legal contracts and medicinal recipes to hymns and epic literature. It is said that Ashurbanipal, who prided himself on literacy, ordered his scribes to copy texts from across Mesopotamia to build this royal collection. The tablets were sorted in rooms of the palace, perhaps grouped by content and subject. It must have been a wonder of its time, room after room filled with neatly arrayed tablets, each incised with tiny symbols, preserving the stories and records of a civilization. In a tragic turn, the palace was destroyed by attackers decades later. Yet that destruction had a silver lining for the tablets themselves. The intense fire that raged through the city baked many of the clay records to a ceramic hardness, much like pottery, making them even more durable. Buried under rubble and earth, they cooled and then lay quietly underground for over 2 millennia. When modern archaeologists excavated the site in the 19th century, they found these tablets still intact, the ancient marks legible as if written yesterday. Through flame and time, the carefully stored words had survived, allowing us today to read the thoughts of people who lived so very long ago. Many of those clay tablets have survived to this day, thanks to the gentle resilience of their material. If kept dry and safe from harm, a clay tablet can endure for thousands of years without a word fading. In some cases, ancient fires that destroyed cities accidentally baked the tablets even harder, turning them into lasting relics. Archaeologists have found tablets in places like the ruins of long-lost cities or royal archives, still bearing sharp cuneiform signs on their surfaces. Buried under the sands or rubble, they waited silently until modern archaeologists uncovered them like buried treasure of knowledge. It is soothing to think that a simple clay record, kept in a quiet corner, can outlast empires and remain to whisper its story far into the future. While clay tablets were used in Mesopotamia, along the gentle bends of the Nile River, another form of writing material was coming into use. In ancient Egypt, scribes learned to create a thin, flexible surface from the papyrus reed. They cut long green stalks into slender strips, laid them crisscross, and pressed them until they dried into light brown sheets that were smooth enough to write on. These papyrus sheets, when joined end to end, formed long scrolls that could be rolled up for storage. Compared to clay, papyrus felt soft to the touch and was much lighter to carry. It introduced a new, more delicate way to keep words, one that rustled quietly when handled, like a dry whisper of the river reeds from which it came. Storing papyrus scrolls required its own gentle art. After writing, a scroll would be carefully rolled up from one end, winding into a tight cylinder of papyrus. The papyrus itself was smooth to the touch, with faint horizontal lines where the plant fibres were laid. Rolled up, a scroll was fairly light and easy to carry, though a very long text might fill multiple rolls. Sometimes a thin cord or strip of linen tied around the roll kept it snug and secure. An average papyrus scroll, once tied, was about the width of a hand and could be conveniently stored upright or on its side without damage. To help identify each scroll without unrolling it, a small tag was often attached to its outside edge, perhaps a piece of papyrus or leather with the title, or a simple description of the contents written on it. These tags fluttered softly as one handled the scrolls, like little flags indicating which story or document lay within. Because scribes typically wrote only on one side of the papyrus, a lengthy work would require multiple scrolls, each labelled as part of a set. In the great libraries of the classical world, such as the famed Library of Alexandria, thousands of scrolls rested in wooden shelving units. The shelves had pigeonhole-like cubbies or slots, each housing a single scroll or a few grouped together, laid horizontally to prevent any crushing under their own weight. A visitor to such a library would see row upon row of these rolled manuscripts, each nestled in its place, quietly waiting for someone to take it out and read by the light of an oil lamp. When seeking a particular work, a scholar might gently scan the labels, eyes drifting over the neat script on each tag until the desired title was found. Then, with both hands, they would lift the scroll out, feeling the textured papyrus and the slight give of the rolled sheets. A long composition often required several scrolls. For example, a lengthy epic or set of teachings could fill multiple rolls, each one marked to indicate its sequence. Naturally, each scroll was treated with care, for papyrus, though sturdy when new, could grow brittle at the edges as it aged. Returning a scroll to its nook was done just as softly, sliding it back into its wooden cubby so it could rest undisturbed until needed again. Great care was taken to preserve these rolled books. Papyrus, while strong, could suffer from dampness or heavy use. In climates like Egypt, the arid air helped keep scrolls intact for very long periods. In fact, some papyrus documents left in sealed jars in desert caves have survived over 2,000 years. But in places with humid air, scrolls were known to mildew or rot if neglected. Ancient librarians understood this and chose storage rooms wisely, often in the inner parts of stone buildings, away from rain or excessive heat. They might periodically unroll and air out the scrolls on a sunny day, much as one airs out linens, to ensure no moisture was trapped inside. Additionally, popular or aging texts were regularly copied. A scribe would be assigned to carefully transcribe a fragile scroll onto fresh papyrus, a task that might take days or weeks for a long work. Imagine a scribe seated cross-legged with two scrolls before him, one old and yellowed, perhaps fraying at the edges, and one new and blank. Line by line he transfers the words, dipping his reed pen in ink and patiently recreating the document. Now the knowledge lives on in the new scroll, while the old one can be retired or stored more gently. Through such quiet diligence, the librarians and scribes ensured that the content of their collections could endure beyond the natural lifespan of any single papyrus roll. As the centuries quietly passed, the shape of stored knowledge began to change. By the late Roman era and into medieval times, the rolled scroll gradually gave way to a new form, the codex, an early type of book with individual pages bound together along one edge. Instead of unwinding a long roll, readers could now gently flip through leaves of parchment or paper, moving back and forth with ease. Each page was written on both sides, a practical innovation that made it possible to fit much more text into a single volume. To make these pages, a material called parchment became popular, sheets made from treated animal skins such as sheep, goat or calf that were durable, velvety and strong. Writing on parchment with a quill and ink produced a soft, faint scratching sound, and the pages had a pleasant, substantial feel. A finished codex, bound in leather-covered wooden boards, felt solid yet comforting in the hands. It could be closed to protect the writing inside and stacked neatly with other books, something fragile scrolls could not easily do. Meanwhile, a new writing material was making its way westward, true paper made from pulped plant fibres. This invention, born in ancient China, travelled along trade routes through the Islamic world and reached Europe by the medieval period. By the 12th and 13th centuries, paper mills in places like Spain and Italy were producing sturdy sheets from linen and cotton rags. These early papers had a subtly textured surface and often showed delicate watermarks when held up to the light. Though not as luminous as parchment, paper was much less costly and easier to produce in large quantities. At first, European scribes were cautious about using it for important texts, but over time they recognised that a well-made paper could last for centuries if kept dry and safe. Gradually, records and books began to be written on paper for everyday purposes, reserving expensive parchment for the most prized volumes. This quiet change set the stage for the coming printing revolution, because when Johannes Gutenberg and other early printers began operating in the 15th century, they had ample supplies of paper on which to print their broadsheets and books. Paper's prevalence meant knowledge could be reproduced and stored in greater quantity than ever before, filling shelves not just in palaces and monasteries, but also in universities and merchant homes. The world was becoming ever so slightly more connected by the written word, all resting on this humble, flexible material. Meanwhile, the use of paper had already enabled vast libraries in the Islamic world during the Middle Ages. In cities like Baghdad and Cordoba, scholars gathered thousands of manuscripts in great houses of knowledge such as Baghdad's Bayt al-Hikmah, House of Wisdom. These books were copied on crisp paper pages, bound into volumes and stored on wooden shelves or in cupboards. Accounts from the time speak of libraries with catalogues and librarians, where readers could borrow volumes to study or copy. Paper in these regions was sometimes dyed in pale hues or treated with herbal perfumes to discourage insects, giving the books a distinct look and a gentle, pleasant scent. Within those library walls, under ornate arches or in garden courtyards, learned men and women would quietly leaf through treatises on mathematics, medicine, or poetry. They often rested the book on a wooden rehau, bookstand, and turned pages carefully so as not to smudge the script. The commitment to preserving knowledge was deeply felt. When a book was not in use, it might be wrapped in cloth or placed back in a carved chest for safekeeping. The scene would have been serene, the soft murmur of recitation in one corner, the faint scratching of a pen as a copyist made an extra copy of a popular text in another, and all around rows of books patiently awaiting their readers. In cultures separated by great distances, the reverence for books and learning manifested in these calm, protective practices, creating similarly gentle routines and environments. The Renaissance and early modern era ushered in new changes to the world of paper storage, though all in a calm evolution. With the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, books and documents became more plentiful. In a small workshop in Mainz, Germany, around the year 1455, one might imagine the scene. Rows of freshly printed pages hanging from lines across the ceiling, drying slowly. At a sturdy wooden press, printers carefully arranged metal type and applied oil-based ink with padded balls. When the press lever was pulled, it pressed a sheet of paper against the inked type with a firm, brief pressure. Releasing it with a creak of wood and iron, the printer would peel away the sheet to reveal lines of crisp black text, mirroring the arrangement of the type. Each new page, warm with the friction of printing, was handled gently at the corners and clipped up to dry in the airy loft. The printing house was not loud, just the muffled thump of the press, occasional murmurs of workers exchanging a few words, and the flutter of drying paper when a draught caught it. Outside, perhaps the sound of distant church bells or a horse's hooves on cobblestone streets drifted in. But inside this space, an early mass production of knowledge was quietly underway. After printing and binding, these pages would become books destined for libraries and personal collections, meaning far more people would need places to store and reference written knowledge than ever before. The world of information was expanding, one soft press of paper at a time. Where a medieval library might have held only a few dozen lovingly copied volumes, a later library could possess hundreds or thousands of printed books. To accommodate these, libraries grew in size, lining more walls with shelves and sometimes even requiring ladders to reach the highest volumes. Quietly, catalogues were developed, handwritten registers or ledgers noting each book and where it was kept, so a librarian could find it without fuss. Still, the atmosphere remained peaceful. A scholar might climb a wooden ladder to a tall shelf, the ladder's rungs giving a slight creak, then descend with a cherished volume tucked under one arm. Paper itself became more common as mills and trade spread across Europe. By the 17th and 18th centuries, not only kings and scholars, but also merchants and even ordinary townspeople dealt with more written papers. In a merchant's office of the 1700s, one might see tall cabinets and desks fitted with pigeonholes and small drawers. Within each pigeonhole, bundles of letters and bills could be neatly sorted by date or topic. Important correspondence was often tied together with a ribbon or a piece of string, sometimes a red ribbon for official papers, giving rise to the term red tape for bureaucratic paperwork, though at the time it was simply an efficient way to bind related documents. If one opened a desk drawer in that era, it would reveal stacks of parchment and paper, perhaps contracts bound in leather folders, maps rolled up and secured with twine, and personal letters arranged in a careful pile. Each item had its place. The office might be dimly lit by daylight through a window, or the soft glow of a lamp in the evening, illuminating dust motes above the papers. A clerk working late would quietly sift through these documents, the papers making a gentle rustling as he searched for a needed record. When finished, he would tie each bundle up again slowly and place it back in its nook, taking a moment to ensure everything was just as orderly as he found it. With that done, he could close the office for the night, knowing everything lay where it should. Governments and courts of this time also amassed great quantities of documents. Royal decrees, town council minutes, birth and marriage registers, all were written on parchment or the new paper and needed safekeeping. Special archive rooms were established in palaces and city halls. In these chambers, tall wooden cupboards and shelves bore the weight of countless files. Some documents were bound into volumes, like yearly account books or official registers, and stood side by side. Others were kept as loose sheets tied in bundles, or stored in slim leather cases labelled with dates or titles. An archivist in a powdered wig might move silently along the rows of shelves with a candle in hand, looking for a particular year's records. The faint flame would flicker over handwritten labels on the spines of hefty ledgers or on tags dangling from bundles. Upon finding the right packet, they would lift it carefully, feeling the slight weight of years of history in their hands, and carry it to a desk. There, with utmost care, they would untie the faded ribbon and open the pages, the old paper releasing a dry, papery scent into the still air. After noting what was needed, the papers were gently tied up once more and returned to their resting place in the archive. Such routines, repeated daily, helped ensure that even as more and more paper filled the world, nothing important would be lost among the piles. Such methodical organisation, while mundane, brought reassurance that each important document could be retrieved whenever needed. By the 19th century, the world was awash in even more paper. Factories could churn out paper in huge quantities, and new inventions like the steel pen and the typewriter in the late 1800s meant letters and documents multiplied in number and speed. Early in that century, offices still relied on old methods. Clerks kept logs and letter books, and correspondence was often bound into big volumes or bundled with string. As was common in Victorian-era offices, shelves sagged under thick ledgers labelled by year or account, and on desks lay stacks of incoming letters waiting to be sorted. Filing was a matter of placing papers in drawers or cabinets wherever they fit, often folded and tied in packets. It worked, but it could be slow to retrieve a specific piece unless one knew exactly which bundle or book contained it. In those days before carbon paper or photocopiers, offices devised clever ways to keep copies of outgoing letters. One common method was the use of a letter copying press. Imagine a contraption like a large screw-driven vise with flat wooden plates. A freshly written letter, still glistening with wet ink, would be placed against a thin sheet of dampened copying paper, and together they were sandwiched in the press. By tightening the screw, the clerk applied firm, even pressure, which caused a faint impression of the original letter's ink to transfer onto the tissue-like copy sheet. After a minute or two, he would release the screw and gently peel the papers apart. On the thin, translucent page, a mirror image of the letter appeared, the ink now a soft grey. Once it dried, that copy was bound into a special copybook. Over time, this book accumulated an archive of correspondence, page after page of pale handwriting preserving every letter sent. Filling such a copybook was a regular end-of-day task. One can picture a clerk carefully pressing each letter, patiently waiting for the ink to set, in the quiet of an emptying office. The next day, the letters themselves would be mailed away, but their ghosts remained in the copybook on the shelf, ready to be consulted if anyone ever needed to recall exactly what had been written. Towards the end of the 1800s, a quiet revolution in office organisation began. Thinkers and inventors proposed a more systematic way to manage the growing tide of documents. Instead of binding papers into books or leaving them in piles, why not give each document a home of its own in a dedicated folder, and arrange those folders so that finding one would be as simple as opening a drawer? Thus, the filing cabinet was born. Early filing cabinets were often made of polished wood, with a series of deep drawers. Inside each drawer, metal or wooden supports allowed file folders to stand upright, rather like books on a shelf but facing forward. A clerk could open a drawer and flip through the tabs of the folders, each tab peeking above the papers with a handwritten or typed label. These labels might read invoices, letters A to M, or client files, for example. The folders themselves were typically made of sturdy card or manila paper, a buff-coloured, durable paper named after manila hemp fibre. They had a comforting smoothness and a slight rigidity that kept the papers inside flat and protected. Suddenly, organisation became simpler. No more untying strings on bundles or searching through heavy ledgers for one small entry. Now a clerk could slide a drawer open with a soft rattle, quickly thumb through alphabetically or numerically ordered folders, and pull out the exact piece of paper needed in moments. By the early 20th century, the vertical filing cabinet had firmly established itself in offices worldwide. Many were now made of metal, usually a subdued olive green or grey steel, built less for beauty and more for utility. They stood in rows along office walls, unassuming and quiet, each cabinet with its rectilinear silhouette, held perhaps 4 or 5 drawers stacked one above the other. Little label holders on the front of each drawer indicated what lay inside. When a drawer was pulled open, it glided out with a muted metallic roll, revealing a dense forest of file folders inside. Despite this mechanical innovation, there was still something very human and gentle about the process. One still touched the files, read the labels, and felt the slight resistance as the folders pressed against each other. The daily routine of a secretary or records keeper might involve strolling over to these cabinets in the afternoon light, methodically refilling a folder with the day's documents, or removing a file to reference yesterday's letter. It was work, but it had a calm rhythm. Open, search, retrieve, and close, often accompanied by the quiet shuffle of papers and the click of a drawer latch. Other organising tools grew alongside the filing cabinet. The simple act of punching holes along one edge of papers led to the invention of the ring binder, a cover with metal rings that snap open and shut to hold pages. With binders, reports and reference materials could be kept like books, their pages easy to flip through, yet also easy to rearrange or update. Opening a binder's rings made a soft snapping sound, and new pages slid in or out effortlessly. Many such binders would sit quietly on shelves, labelled on their spines, forming a little personal reference library for their owner. Desks had trays for incoming and outgoing papers, sorting work in a gentle flow. Placing a letter in the out tray signified it was ready for posting or for the next clerk's action, while the in tray collected new arrivals to be dealt with. This simple tool kept work flowing smoothly and gave a visual cue of tasks, ensuring nothing was lost on a cluttered surface. And of course, in libraries, the expansion of knowledge led to the famous card catalogues, cabinets of small wooden drawers, each holding hundreds of index cards. Librarians meticulously typed or wrote a card for every book, noting its title, author and subjects, then filed the cards in alphabetical order. Opening a card catalogue drawer made a distinctive faint wooden scrape, followed by the papery flutter as one flipped through the cards. These indexes were the key to finding any book's location on the shelves, yet using them was itself a quiet pleasure, an exercise in patience and order, performed in the hush of a library reading room. A librarian or visitor might stand before the catalogue, pulling a drawer out gently and thumbing through the cards with a soft riffing sound. In that act was the satisfaction of a well-kept archive, everything in its place, every piece of information connected to its source. Midway through the 20th century, the world found itself with more paper than ever. Libraries and offices were sometimes bursting at the seams with documents. Rooms that once felt spacious were now filled floor to ceiling with shelves and cabinets holding decades of records. In a large city newspaper office, for instance, archives of old newspapers might fill countless bound volumes or boxes. Similarly, government agencies maintained warehouse-like storage rooms for old files. These spaces, while impressive, were also vulnerable. A single unfortunate fire or flood could destroy a vast amount of information. Thus, people began exploring methods to back up and condense paper records. One important solution was microfilm. Beginning in the mid-1900s, archives started photographing documents and pages onto film at a greatly reduced size. A special camera would take pictures of each page, shrinking it down so that a long roll of film, held on a small reel, could contain hundreds or even thousands of pages. These microfilm reels were then stored in small boxes or canisters, taking up only a fraction of the space of the original papers. To read a microfilm, one used a machine with magnifying lenses. The reel would be loaded onto spindles, and as one turned a knob, the film would scroll past an illuminated screen. On the screen, the tiny images of pages appeared blown up to readable size, glowing softly in black and white. In a darkened archive room, the microfilm reader made a gentle whirring sound as it advanced frame by frame. Many researchers spent long afternoons in such rooms, quietly turning knobs and listening to the soft hum as they skimmed through years of history captured on film. Microfilm proved to be a reliable, steady technology. As long as the film was stored in a cool, dry place, it could last for many decades, and it was immune to the sorts of paper decay that afflicted brittle newsprint and acidic documents. Around the same time, archivists and librarians became more scientifically mindful of how to preserve original paper. They learned that controlling temperature and humidity could slow down the deterioration of paper fibres. So, Many archives upgraded to climate-controlled storage. An archive vault might be kept around 18 degrees Celsius, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and about 40% relative humidity, cool and just dry enough to discourage mould and slow any chemical breakdown. Standing inside one of these modern archive rooms, one would notice the air feels still and slightly cool, and the scent is a mix of old paper and a clean dryness. The lights are often kept low or off unless someone is working, to minimise light exposure to the documents. Important books and manuscripts are placed in custom-made boxes or slipcovers, shielding them from light and dust. The enclosures are made of acid-free board, a material that feels like sturdy cardboard, but without the harsh acids that regular paper and cardboard contain. Similarly, archivists use acid-free folders to hold loose documents. These are usually a neutral beige or cream colour with a soft feel. Particularly delicate pages might even be sealed within clear polyester sleeves, an encapsulation that allows them to be handled and read without directly touching the fragile paper. When an old document is placed into such a folder or sleeve, it is like giving it a gentle new home, one that will not slowly eat away at it. Handling practices also evolved. Staff wear clean cotton or nitrile gloves when touching photographs, or sometimes even brittle paper to avoid transferring oils from their skin. They support fragile pages with extra sheets or boards underneath, lifting them gingerly to avoid any tear or crackle of distress. Every movement in an archive became thoughtful and patient, the goal being to let these papers live on as long as possible in peace. Another technique to save aging paper was the process of deacidification. Books and documents from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, often made from wood pulp paper, were prone to becoming yellow and brittle because of residual acids in the paper. By the late 20th century, scientists had developed sprays and baths that could neutralise these acids. In some libraries, teams carefully treated at-risk books with these solutions to halt the slow burn of time. There was something tender about the idea, washing or misting a book with a gentle chemical bath to extend its life, as if tending to a delicate plant. The books that underwent this treatment would not miraculously return to mint condition, but their pages would remain stable and not crumble under a careful touch, ensuring they could be read for generations quietly to come. And one can witness the fruits of these preservation efforts in the gentle routines of a modern archives reading room. Here, under soft lighting, researchers sit at large tables, each with a cradle or foam pad to support an old book or manuscript. There is a reverent silence. An archivist, perhaps wearing white gloves, brings out a protective box and opens its lid to reveal a historical document resting within layers of tissue paper. It might be a bundle of letters from centuries ago, the ink now sepia-toned and the paper thin, wavy and mottled with age. The archivist sets it before the researcher, who handles each sheet as delicately as one might handle a dried petal. The paper, though aged, has been well cared for. It feels soft, almost cloth-like, yet brittle at the edges. The researcher may use a wooden pointer or just very steady hands to turn pages, ensuring no strain on the fibres. As they read, they take notes with a pencil. Pens are usually forbidden near such treasures lest ink ever spill. In that room, the ambience is almost sacred. The air is cool, and the hum of the ventilation system is barely noticeable. Time seems to slow as the researcher absorbs words written in another era. When finished, they nod gratefully to the archivist and carefully place the papers back into their enclosure. The box is closed, and perhaps tied with a ribbon or secured with small clasps, and the precious document is carried back to the secure, climate-controlled stacks. Moments like this play out daily around the world. Quiet encounters between modern readers and preserved voices of the past, made possible by centuries of mindful storage and care. All the while, outside the grand halls of libraries and offices, everyday people have quietly managed their own little archives at home. Personal home filing habits and systems might not be elaborate, but they are intimate and comforting in their own way. Consider a small desk in the corner of a living room or bedroom, perhaps late in the evening. A person sits with a lamp on, sorting through the day's mail or a pile of accumulated papers. There are the utility bills, the bank statements, a medical form, perhaps a receipt, or a child's school note. One by one, each paper finds its place. Maybe an accordion-style folder labelled by category is brought out, its compartments unfolding like the quiet pages of an organiser. The electric bill is slid into a pocket labelled Utilities, joining the previous months in tidy order. A health insurance letter goes into a folder marked Medical. Each action is small and unhurried, accompanied by the soft sounds of paper moving against paper or the subtle click of a folder's latch. Many homes have a dedicated drawer or box where important documents live. Imagine pulling open a desk drawer and seeing neatly stacked file folders inside. They might be in a pleasing array of pastel colours, or simply all manila, each with a handwritten tab. House, car, school records, insurance, receipts. In that drawer may also lie personal treasures, a bundle of old greeting cards tied with a ribbon, a child's drawings preserved in a large envelope, or a yellowed letter from a grandparent carefully kept in its original envelope. These items sit quietly among the more mundane papers, a mix of the practical and the sentimental. When the drawer closes, everything is together in the dark, resting until the next time it is needed or remembered. In earlier generations, a family's important papers often lived in a single cherished book or chest. For example, many households kept a large family Bible, not only as a religious item but as a record keeper. Tucked between its pages or on the end papers, one would note births, marriages, and passings in careful script. Within that one volume, between passages of scripture, lay the unofficial archive of the family's history. Some pages might hold pressed flowers from a wedding or a clipped newspaper announcement of an anniversary. All of it was folded neatly and kept together in the Bible, which usually occupied a place of honour on a bookshelf or in a bedside drawer. Likewise, some families designated a sturdy wooden coffer or metal box for safeguarding deeds, family letters, and certificates. In times of emergency, say, a sudden evacuation or a house fire, it was often this box that someone would grab in haste, knowing it contained irreplaceable pieces of their identity and legacy. These home archives, humble in size, quietly carried the weight of personal history. Even today, one might find in an attic a tin filled with old postcards and diplomas, or a leather folio containing grandparents' correspondence. Blowing off the dust and opening such a container can feel like unsealing a time capsule. A faint whiff of old paper emerges, and one discovers layers of life events preserved in handwriting and type. In each case, the impulse is the same as that behind the grandest library vaults, to hold safe the pieces of the past that define who we are and where we come from, all in a quiet corner of home. From generation to generation, one of the most personal forms of paper storage has been the diary or journal. In the quiet of late night or early morning, countless individuals have put pen to paper to record their days, their dreams and their worries. The diary itself might be a simple lined notebook or a leather-bound volume, often kept private and tucked away in a drawer or under a pillow. With each entry dated and written in a familiar hand, these journals become a repository of a life lived, one page for each day, accumulating like gentle layers of memory. Years later, opening an old diary can be a poignant experience. The pages may have yellowed slightly and the ink may have faded to brown, but the words can bring back moments with startling clarity. We can imagine someone sitting by a window, reading their younger self's thoughts by the golden afternoon light, the pages rustling softly as they turn. They smile at a long-ago joy, perhaps wipe away a tear at a forgotten sorrow, all the while held by the embrace of those paper pages. When closed again, the diary resumes its silence, holding its confidences until the next time it is opened. Such journals often line personal bookshelves or are boxed up and carried from home to home, usually one of the first things people safeguard during moves or upheavals, because within their covers is a self-portrait preserved in pen and paper. Photo albums and scrapbooks are another form of personal archive that many cherish. On a quiet night, someone might pull a heavy photo album off a bookshelf. The cover might be a little dusty, the pages slightly stiff. Sitting comfortably, they open it to hear the faint crackle of plastic film as it lifts from the adhesive pages in older albums, or the whisper of tissue interleaving in a more deluxe album. Photographs smile back, each a moment in time preserved on paper. Turning a page is an exercise in gentle remembrance. Here is a birthday party from long ago, there a vacation by the sea. The images, though still, are full of life in the viewer's mind. Each photograph might trigger a cascade of memories, the sound of laughter, the smell of ocean air, the warmth of that day. The album itself is a form of storage, not just of pictures, but of emotions and stories. It sits quietly most days, but when opened, it fills the room with silent echoes of the past and a warm sense of continuity. When the album is closed with care and placed back on the shelf, it's like returning a storybook to its place, its contents safe until the next time nostalgia beckons. As the late 20th century turned into the 21st, the world began to shift toward digital storage, a change that crept in quietly at first. Computers, once bulky and rare, became common on office desks and in homes. Documents that would have been typed on paper could now be typed on a screen and saved not in a physical drawer, but on a hard drive or disk. At first, those digital files were still often transferred to tangible media, floppy disks, then CDs, then small USB drives, which people filed away much like they would a stack of papers, albeit far more compact. One can picture an office worker around 1985 finishing a document on a computer with a monochrome green screen. She clicks Save, and the computer's floppy disk drive chirps softly as it writes the data. The worker then ejects a square floppy disk, a thin magnetic disk inside a plastic sleeve, that holds the file. Taking a pen, she labels a sticker on the disk, Q2 Sales Report. Next to her desk is a little box designed to hold these disks, each in its paper envelope. She gently places the newly labelled disk among the others in the box, akin to how she might once have placed a typed report into a file folder. Later, when she needs that report, she'll thumb through the disks, read the labels, and insert the chosen one back into the drive, hearing the faint whir as the computer retrieves the file. In this way, even the early days of digital storage followed the familiar rhythms of paper filing, labelling, sorting, and storing tangible items that contained the information. It was a quiet revolution, blending old habits with new technology. Interestingly, the language of traditional filing carried over into the digital realm. On a computer, one still creates folders and files and places documents into them, just as one would slip a sheet of paper into a manila folder. The desktop metaphor was designed to be familiar. Documents can be arranged in folders on a virtual desktop screen, and when they are no longer needed, they can be dragged to an icon of a trash bin. Even the image used to represent a digital file often looks like a little sheet of paper, and a folder icon looks like the tabbed manila folders of old. These gentle nods to the past helped people trust the new technology, bridging the gap between the feel of paper and the invisible nature of electronic data. With the advent of email and the internet, correspondence and records increasingly arrived in electronic form. The mailbox on the wall was no longer the sole bearer of letters. Now, an inbox on a computer screen held messages as well. When an email comes in, there is no rustle of paper, just a soft chime or a subtle notification pop-up. Yet we still file these messages into folders within our email programs, creating categories and labels to mimic the organisation we used with physical mail. Office memos became electronic documents. Forms that used to be filled out in pen could be submitted through a web page. Filing cabinets in some offices grew emptier as archives migrated to servers and cloud storage. An office that once might have needed an entire room for files could now fit all of that information onto a tiny server, or, later, even onto an online account, accessible with a few keystrokes. The sounds of storage changed. Instead of footsteps echoing down halls of archives, we hear the light tapping of keys. Instead of the thud of a ledger on a table, we have the almost inaudible click of a mouse opening a file. Nonetheless, paper did not disappear. Even today, in the digital age, most people and institutions use a blend of physical and digital storage. A contract may be emailed as a PDF, but then printed out to be signed with a pen and eventually scanned back into a digital archive. Important family documents, like birth certificates, marriage licenses or passports, still exist as paper copies, often kept in fireproof boxes or home safes, a tangible backup to any digital scans. Many of us still print out boarding passes or event tickets, or jot down notes on paper, out of habit or simply because it feels reassuring. So, in a typical day, one might switch seamlessly between digital and paper worlds, paying a bill online but then filing the confirmation printout in a folder, or reading a report on a screen but then scribbling thoughts in a paper notebook. The two systems complement each other, providing convenience and reassurance. On a personal level, organising digital files has become as routine as sorting papers once was. Consider someone at home in the late evening, sitting before a softly glowing laptop. They open a folder of documents, perhaps scans of bills, important emails or school PDFs, and begin arranging them. With a few clicks, they create new digital folders labelled finances or travel plans and drag files into them. Each file icon moves silently across the screen into its new place. It's a quiet task. The only audible sound might be the faint tapping of keys or the distant hum of the computer's fan. Yet the process mirrors the old ways. Categories are chosen, items are named and filed, clutter is reduced. Similarly, another person might be curating their digital photographs. They scroll through pictures on a tablet, selecting favourites from a holiday and grouping them into a virtual album. As they do so, memories replay gently in their mind. There is no crackling of paper, no physical album on their lap, but the emotional resonance is akin to flipping through a cherished scrapbook. When finished, they feel the same small contentment that comes after tidying a shelf. Things are in order. They might back up the collection to a tiny flash drive, a device that fits in a pocket, again echoing the instinct to have a spare copy stored safely away. In the morning, that flash drive may sit quietly in a drawer, holding years of diaries, letters or photos in digital form. It's imperceptible to the eye, no thicker than a stick of gum, but ready to blossom into images and words whenever one wishes to see them. Modern offices call this a hybrid approach to document management. Files might be born digital, yet end up in a physical file, or vice versa. One can imagine a quiet scene in a contemporary archive. Rows of computers humming softly in an air-conditioned room, storing backups of millions of documents, while next door, in a climate-controlled vault, shelves of archival boxes hold the paper originals. In many national archives and libraries, this is exactly the case. Digital records are duplicated and periodically migrated to new formats to ensure nothing is lost as technology evolves, much as monks once recopied fading manuscripts onto fresh parchment. And just as ancient scholars inscribed words in enduring clay, today there are efforts to put digital data onto stable, long-lasting materials. For instance, some projects encase information in quartz glass, or inscribe it onto metal plates. And one fascinating endeavour called the Memory of Mankind project has been laser printing tiny text and images onto ceramic tablets. Those ceramic pieces, not much larger than coasters, are then sealed in containers and buried deep in a salt mine in the Austrian Alps, a place where humidity and temperature hardly change. They are meant to last for thousands of years, quietly waiting in the dark for future generations, much like the clay tablets in ancient temple archives waited millennia to be found. It's a modern echo of the oldest storage techniques, using Earth's most stable materials and environments to guard our words. Though we call it the cloud, this digital storage still has a physical home. In many cases, it resides in a sprawling data centre on the outskirts of a city or in a quiet industrial park. Picture a vast, windowless building filled with row upon row of metal cabinets, not so different in concept from library shelves, but these cabinets hold servers that blink with tiny lights. Inside each server, information is stored on whirring disks or on microchips, layer upon layer of binary data encoding our documents, emails, and photographs. The air is kept cool and dry, maintained by steady air conditioning, just like an archive protects old paper with climate control. The noise is a constant soft roar of fans and the faint buzz of electricity, a modern cousin to the silence of a traditional reading room. Few people walk these aisles. Most of the work is done automatically by software, but security guards monitor access, and engineers occasionally stroll through, checking on the machines much as a librarian might check on books. Data centers also have robust backup routines. Important data is duplicated on multiple drives and often in multiple distant locations. Late at night, when most users sleep, these centers quietly perform their backups and system checks, ensuring that nothing will be lost by morning. In essence, a data center is the 21st century equivalent of the great libraries and archives, a place where knowledge and records reside and are guarded around the clock. We seldom see this process, but it sustains the convenience of the digital age. If one could stand in a data center at midnight surrounded by the blue blink of status lights, one might feel a similar reverence as in an ancient archive. Here, too, humanity's collective output is being watched over, moment by moment, by diligent systems and caretakers, carrying our stories and information safely into the future. Reflecting on this long journey of storage, from clay and papyrus to paper and digital, one finds a soothing continuity. Across eras, the tools and materials have evolved from earthen tablets to reed scrolls, to parchment codices, to printed books, to files and cabinets, and now to bits and computers. But the underlying impulse is the same, to keep our knowledge and memories safe. Every method, whether it was a tablet in a niche, a scroll in a pigeonhole, a book on a shelf, a file in a cabinet, or a file on a server, involved someone carefully putting something aside for the future. In that simple act, there is a kind of gentle hope. The hope that what we write and create will not vanish, that it will be available when needed, or when someone years later wants to understand or remember. In the silence of a library at dusk, in the orderly rows of a records room, or in the humming aisles of a data centre at midnight, that hopeful care is enacted over and over. It's in the librarian's quiet shelving of a book, the archivist's delicate handling of a document, or the user clicking the save icon on a draft. These are all gestures of preservation, small and almost meditative in their routine. For a moment, one might picture all these forms of storage existing together in the mind's eye. In one corner, a clay tablet sits on a shelf. In another, a papyrus scroll lies curled in its cubby. Not far away, a leather-bound codex stands upright between its neighbours, while a bundle of letters tied with ribbon rests beside a brass ink pot. A filing cabinet drawer hangs slightly open, revealing orderly manila folders, and above it on a table, a laptop computer softly glows, its screen showing neat rows of digital file icons. This imagined room of archives is quiet and timeless. A gentle golden light illuminates dust motes in the air. Each object, tablet, scroll, book, letter, file, or digital device, holds words that someone long ago or recently wanted to preserve. Though separated by centuries of innovation, they all share a family resemblance of purpose. Looking at them, one feels a sense of continuity with all those past souls who, just like us, didn't want their thoughts and knowledge to slip away with time. It's as if all these voices from different eras are resting side by side, patiently waiting to be heard. Such an image brings a certain peace, the reassurance that human memory, aided by these inventions, has been carefully tended throughout the ages. It is comforting to imagine all those words and ideas gathered safely in their resting places, from the oldest cuneiform tablet sleeping in a museum drawer, to the papyrus scrolls preserved in desert caves, to the leather-bound manuscripts in a monastery chest, to the letters and files in a home bureau, and onto the digital data quietly backed up in a distant server. Each is part of an unbroken chain linking us to the past and reaching toward the future. The history of paper storage, and its predecessors, is not a tale of sudden drama or noise, but rather of steady, calm refinement, an ever-improving lullaby of organisation. In that enduring, methodical care for our collective memory, there is a profound quietness. It means that even as nights fall and centuries turn, the knowledge and stories we have cherished are cradled in safe hands and places, ready to whisper their tales whenever one wishes to listen.